Hey there, it's Melissa Brunetti, and welcome to the Mind Your Own Karma podcast. Hey there, Karma crew. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Mind Your Own Karma Beyond the Bandage. If you pressed play today, what that tells me about you is you're ready to face some uncomfortable truths in the name of healing. Whether that means breaking free from a narcissist in your own life, recovering from the emotional damage they left behind, or maybe confronting your own patterns head on. You know that naming dysfunction is the first step to breaking free from it all. Today's guest is Ben Taylor, founder of Raw Motivations, a trauma-informed coach, speaker, and a narcissist in active recovery. After years of emotional manipulation and destructive behavior, Ben chose a radically different path, one of honesty, healing, and helping others break free. Now he empowers thousands of women every day to escape narcissistic abuse, break trauma bonds, and rebuild their identity. Through viral content, deep coaching, and live workshops, Ben's mission is to expose the patterns, call out the lies, and walk people into freedom. It's time to rip off the bandage. Let's dive in. Welcoming Ben Taylor to the show today. Hi, Ben.
Hi there.
I just want to say I'm super excited to have this conversation because, as I was just saying to you, I feel like the word narcissist gets thrown around a lot, and I'm not really sure that people really know what a narcissist is. I'm curious to find out what is behind people that become narcissist. Is it trauma? Is it genetic? What is it? So I have a lot of questions. So
Okay.
super excited to have this conversation. You're a recovering narcissist. And so I just wonder, what does that mean to you and what made you begin that journey?
Yeah, so it's been a long journey and a crazy journey in going through the process that I would call like rewiring my mindset, like how I think, how I feel, how I show up, how I interact with people, how I interact even with myself. It's been a long journey inside of doing that. And inside of that, it's been a process of working through different pieces of coaching modalities, different therapy pieces, different aspects that I've worked on, shifting how I think about myself, shifting how I think about other people, and shifting how I show up. So the piece of working on myself now has been 4 or 5 years of intensive pieces of therapy every single week, of different coaching programs, of different practices I've put in place to try to be able to shift my mindset of how I was showing up. One of the biggest cruxes of all of it was simply the fact that I was lying to myself. I knew that I lied to other people, but I didn't want to admit that I lied to myself. I just wanted to continue to believing that I was right, everybody else was wrong, the world revolved around me, and so many other pieces of it that I tried to convince myself was true, just so that I didn't have to be honest about being accountable for the things that I was doing or the people that I was hurting inside of my life. So this journey of being on recovery has been a wild ride, confronting shame, confronting guilt, confronting my own lies and the things that I've gaslit myself to believe early on, to view that I was right in doing things that were abusive or that were wrong in all those regards. So yeah, it's been this journey of several years now trying to work through that.
What kind of came first? You realizing that you didn't want to be that person, or you realizing that you were hurting people, or was it kind of simultaneous?
It was more at the beginning. It was more of a piece that I didn't really care or didn't really, it didn't matter that I hurt other people because when you boil a lot of it down, a lot of times a narcissist is looking at not necessarily even hurting other people, but just saving himself from hurt. So there's a piece of not wanting to deal with my own guilt or shame and that feeling of that accountability, responsibility that would reveal shame, that would feel like an internal and external like death to me. And so there's a piece of how do I avoid that? And so if I avoid that, then at least I'm not the one getting hurt. Even if other people are getting hurt, at least it's not me. Yeah. So early on, it was a piece that I didn't even care. So the understanding and starting to learn and understand about who I was and how I was showing up and what that actually meant, as far as even like a label or a target to be able to say, okay, this is who I am. This is what's happening. This is what I need to work on. That was a piece that came. And then after that started to become the realization of how I'd hurt people or how it affected people. Simply before, everything was only focused on me. It wasn't a focus on anyone else or the ramifications of my actions. It was always, how do I just move past it? How do I just move on and figure out, well, that person gave up on me, or that person is no longer loyal, but I'm the one that put them in that situation to leave. So many different pieces that had to come honest to the fact of what I'd done and how I'd shown up.
Yeah. So was there a specific moment or a series of moments when you kind of realized the impact of your behavior?
So how I describe it is not necessarily like a light bulb moment, but more of like a dimmer switch,
Hmm.
slowly turning on over a period of time, starting to understand that my personality was different than other people. I interacted with people differently. I had the feelings, the emotions, how I cared about people, all that was different. Learning and even inside of different workplace environments of different personalities, right? Like Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, 16 personalities, DISC personality, like a lot of different personality profiles, and then starting to see how mine was so different than a lot of other people. So it's kind of like an awareness of like something is different. I didn't know what, but something sometimes felt wrong or felt odd or felt off, but I just kind of discount it, push it aside. There was different pieces and just understanding that I didn't have the same level of emotion or the same level of care. Emotion, I would box up into different, I would compartmentalize it. But at that time, I just thought of it as like boxing it up in different boxes. So I didn't have to deal with it, or I didn't have to appear weak or vulnerable in those aspects. And then realizing that I didn't care about other people the same way that I would care about myself, or that I would care about what I wanted. But there would be different people in my life where I'd be like, I don't really care what happens to that person, what doesn't happen to that person. So realizing there was different pieces there when different things came out inside of my relationship, and different pieces where initially when I confessed even some affairs, it was kind of like, maybe if I do this, maybe we'll completely split up and then I can go do what I want, but then I don't look like the bad guy because I'm not the one leaving, but my wife would
Yeah.
be leaving. That was like the thought process. And inside of that, it was shortly after I confessed some of those that I got sent to a sex addiction intensive. And that time I already knew some about narcissism, but I didn't want to admit it. In fact, I told people that I wasn't, or gaslighted my wife to believe that I wasn't showing up that way. But when I went to the sex addiction intensive, I realized there, interacting with people there and going through that program, that that wasn't who I was. It wasn't what I was struggling with, but it was an outline of the narcissism and the pieces of
Mm.
how I showed up. So it's a lot of different things. Whenever I read Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly, that has a lot to do with like shame. That was one of the first times I even tied shame into my world. I had no clue that that's what it was, or what I felt and what I was trying to avoid. So that was kind of a light bulb moment inside of that, was just understanding different pieces of shame, reading different books on like emotional intelligence, on empathy, trying to figure out like what was different, how to process emotions. Cause a lot of that I had no clue about at that point.
Wow. How long was this process?
And it's been about 5 years.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And is it something that's ongoing still? Like, do you
Still
always have
ongoing as
to?
far as like my growth and development
Mhm.
inside of who I am, but who I am now is completely different than who I was before. So there's a like a rebirth that's happening of how I'm showing up different, how I'm engaged with my family, how my wife and I are connected, how we're loving and able to like have connection, communication, intimacy, of how I'm showing up for like my kids. So there's a lot of things that are different. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's like active maintenance of like, oh, don't show up that way, or don't be that guy kind of a thing. But there is pieces of having to work through different triggers, different emotions that come up, different feelings. But it's almost like going to the gym and training. Like you continue to build muscle and reps to have the endurance to keep doing what you know you need to do. And then it doesn't become as hard long term. It becomes more of just who I am and who I'm becoming versus how I used to show up and what I used to do.
Yeah. So this is my big question. What do you believe causes narcissistic tendencies? Are they rooted in trauma, conditioning? What do you think?
So I tend to lie on the side that it's a product of the environment and the family system and how a person is working through that. So trauma, yes, disconnection from the primary caregiver, like a person that is over controlled, under controlled, like overbearing, controlling parents, like different pieces of that. I find less of it personally. I feel like less of it is inside of the DNA and the structure. And a lot of times I hate when people go down that route. I believe that people can have tendencies to be predisposed to it based
Hmm.
on, just their DNA, based on their generation. I think there's different pieces that tie in energetically, sometimes different generational stuff, or generational, sometimes we refer to them as like generational curses or different spiritual ties. There's different pieces that can affect people energetically in multiple ways. But oftentimes when people take the stance of it's just in a person's DNA, I struggle with that because that's the ultimate play that a narcissist can use to be a victim. They're like,
Hmm.
I can't help it that I'm abusive. That's just how I'm wired. right? But
Yeah.
everybody has a choice. And that's why it's different inside of a person's upbringing. They have a choice of what they want to believe, they have a choice of how they want to react. And just because a person might have had trauma growing up, it doesn't necessarily make that person be an abuser or not, right? They have a choice of what they're going to do inside of it. So I believe it's all about the early childhood development, the family conditioning, how a person grows up, what's modeled inside the family, right? Like if it's a single parent home versus if it's both parents, if they're connected, if they're positive, if they're shaming the child, if they're encouraging and lifting up. Like there's so many different nuances to it, but I do believe it's a direct correlation to how a child grows up dealing with and embracing pieces of like shame and guilt, because that's a big underlying factor of narcissism, is like running away from. It's like shame avoidance at the cost of impacting and hurting other people.
For you personally, I'm sure it's different for everybody, but for you personally, at what age do you think you started seeing these tendencies pop up?
Part of that is hard to know for sure, simply because when we go back farther and farther, that it gets foggier and foggier of what I remember. So there's a lot
Hmm.
of my life that I focused on compartmentalizing, so I didn't have to focus on either what I did or how I felt, so I could just keep moving forward. So a lot of the past sometimes can be foggy unless I really sit and concentrate on it. I would say like early on, maybe even like middle school, of like when I go back that far, of like seeing different places where, based on my childhood and based on the family that I was raised in, it felt safer to lie about certain things than it did to tell the truth. And it wasn't because I was gonna, get beat or anything, but it was more of this piece of like, if I lie, then I don't get in trouble for doing what I want to do, because I wasn't safe to express what I wanted or how I wanted to show up, or all different types of things. So it just felt easier of like, well, if I'm gonna feel like I'm being controlled, I'll just lie to make them happy, and then I'll do whatever I want. And got to a place where I became really good at lying, not just lying to others, but especially, like I said, lying to myself. Like that's the biggest piece that affects so much, because you can't work on anything
Hmm.
if you're lying to yourself. We got to a place where I could lie so well that I would lie and get caught on purpose, so then people would think that I was a bad liar, and so therefore I became a good liar, right? Because then I was able to lie with what mattered for me, and then get caught on the stuff that didn't matter. And then that was a piece that I could perpetuate, that my parents thought for a very long time, up until like my early 30s. Like they thought that I was a bad liar, right? Because I'd given that perception to them so I could do what I wanted to do.
Wow, that's pretty smart at that age. Dang.
Right.
So it almost sounds like a whole family dynamic is involved in this. So if you
Mm-hmm.
go back to that, junior high you, what did you need? Like if someone did realize or notice those tendencies are in you, is it like, do you need family counseling? Like what would have helped you from in the beginning?
It's hard to know for sure. There is different pieces that can stem all the way from the early as like childhood, right? Like there is a piece of where they've tracked back different pieces of having less gray matter in the brain due to disconnection from the primary caregiver, like early on, like very, very, very young age, like out of the womb kind of a thing. And so like there's pieces of that I can see inside of my life that happened or that were there inside of growing up. And so there's different nuances that you can't always account for, or that you can't fix in hindsight, or even when you realize that there's different pieces that need to be touched on. But going into your specific question, I would say it has to do with the piece of shame. Like that's like the number one piece, is like being able to have parents that were able to sit and talk through emotions and deal with emotional pieces of like shame and guilt and worry and fear, like all the different pieces of emotions. It wasn't something that we really talked about. Like it wasn't something that came up. It wasn't something that we talked about emotional regulation or what that looked like.
Mhm.
So it became easier to stuff things, to compartmentalize things, to hide things, than it did to actually be honest with it. Because I felt like if I was honest with it, then I'd get a lecture or I'd have someone tell me what I'm supposed to do, but never really hear or feel like they would see me. So that's why I continued just the lying back and forth.
Yeah. So, what would you define narcissistic abuse in plain language? What are some of the early signs that people overlook as well?
I mean, some of the early signs when we're dealing with narcissism might not always be signified inside of the DSM-5. So
Hmm.
that's why even when I deal with a lot of people that are dealing with toxic relationships, we'll just zoom out and figure out how it's affecting that person, right? Because gaslighting is not one of the 9 diagnostic traits for a narcissist, but gaslighting is typically what the majority of narcissists will do, right? So some of the red flags that will happen inside of some toxic relationships, one would be gaslighting, one would be their partner lying, right? That's hands down. You have to have that before you have gaslighting. Gaslighting then is just having another person try to make you believe something that's not actually true, not a lie, but also to the place of like, not just a lie, but to a place of like what you saw, you didn't see, or what you heard, you didn't hear, or what you experienced, you didn't actually experience. That's not how you, that's not the right way that you remembered it, right? You remembered it wrong, different pieces like that.
Mhm.
Oftentimes you'll find narcissists that struggle with being able to respect boundaries, being able to respect other people's decisions, opinions, being able to respect when someone says no, right? That can oftentimes be a place that ends up having more manipulation that comes in, or rage that comes in. There's different aspects of trying to be able to rage, to be able to control or condition another person into thinking or responding a certain way.
Yeah. When you're not getting the result out of a person that you're wanting to get, you're talking about rage and, I was in a relationship where it felt like they would, try rage and then that didn't work. And so they would
Mm-hmm.
try being like really empathetic and that didn't work. And so they would kind of go through the gambit of different things to kind of see how they could manipulate me. Is that kind
Yeah.
of the same thing that you're talking about? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be like testing the waters to see what works. If
Hmm.
you can get triggered with, option A, then go with option A. If that doesn't work, then go to option B. If that doesn't work, then option C, and just keeps going through the whole loop until he kind of like exhausts his loop of things that he could do to trigger and get a reaction response out of you. And then oftentimes will reset. A lot of
Yeah.
times narcissists, like when they get triggered, say like when they get called out, they'll experience guilt really quickly and almost instantaneously. It kind of shifts from guilt straight into shame. And then from there, it becomes the blame game of like, if I feel the shame, how do I get it away from me? And how do I put it on the closest person, which would be like you? Like, how do I take it and like throw it back at you? And when that doesn't work, then oftentimes it's like the rage that comes out of like, you didn't accept the blame, you didn't take the blame. I still feel bad because I still have part of the blame. Then a rage to be able to try to get you to be silent about the blame and about the trigger, about the thing that I caused. And then that's when you'll see typically like the 3 things that'll happen afterwards when narcissists trying to get back to where life feels normal, which is just like the gaslighting, the love bombing, or the future faking, trying to shift the person's reality or perception of reality so that they get to a place where they're no longer called out, or they're no longer feeling bad because they're not being held accountable for something.
Interesting. Why do so many women feel stuck in these relationships? What keeps them stuck?
The trauma bond. That's the number one thing that keeps people stuck, is the trauma bond. And the reason why is because majority of people are so confused on, one, what it is, and then two, how to actually break it. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of content, and there's also not a lot of even like therapists and counselors that I've seen that can successfully help people break free of the trauma bond, because the trauma bond is like this addictive cocktail that's made up of hope and potential that the guy is going to change, something's going to be different, that he has the potential to be a good guy because he was at the beginning. Why can't he be now? Maybe it's my fault because he changed, like I changed, he didn't change, like all these thoughts. But hope and potential kind of starts off the cocktail, and then you have the cognitive dissonance of just like, frankly, just confusion. Like you're stuck in like limbo mode of not knowing what to believe. Does he love me? Does he not? Like, do I believe his words? Do I believe his actions? And oftentimes that's where people come up with a third thing, right? So like, does he love me, or does he hate me? Well, he loves me. He's just stressed right now, which is why he hit me. Right. Like they'll find different reasons to be able to justify it so that it doesn't have to be one or the other, because they're too polarizing for the person to believe or for them to
Hmm.
accept. So the cognitive dissonance leaves a person in limbo and just leaves them straight confused. And whenever a person is sufficiently confused, they won't do anything. That's another reason why people will stay stuck, because that cognitive distance, the confusion that happens, leaves person like they're stuck at a stop sign, confused on if they turn left or if they turn right. They don't have any directions. They're not sure. They need to turn a direction. They just don't know where to go. They're just staying stuck in limbo. And that's what happens in a relationship 24/7 when you're with a narcissist. You have hope and potential, you've got cognitive dissonance, and then you have the intermittent reinforcement. And that's involving the nervous system, like the chemical imbalance, that's involving all of like the rage, the happiness, the push pull, the back and forth, the ups and downs, and all that kind of like seals the deal in one sense to make sure that someone feels like actively addicted. So like from the outside, it could almost be like a close parallel to like Stockholm syndrome, where someone falls in love with their abuser, with their captor. Like that's what's happening, is the person's developing this bond and connection. And then oftentimes that trauma bond will bleed over into identity. And when it starts to bleed over into the person's identity, they start to view themselves with that person and addicted to that person. So even if they left that person, they no longer feel like they know who they are apart from that person, because the intermittent reinforcement feels comfortable. Like the chaos has been normalized at that point. It's been conditioned to feel like the same thing that happens. So when that's not there, that's when a person will experience sometimes peace, but it doesn't feel peaceful. In fact, it feels more like frightening because they don't really know how to be able to handle it.
Yeah. So, what is the most common mindset block that you see in the people that you work with
As far as like when they're trying to heal from it
that
or when they're
keeps
trying to
them from
come to it.
healing? Yeah, or leaving, that keeps them from leaving or healing.
What keeps them from leaving is the trauma bond, 100%, hands down, the confusion. Like their lack of clarity is what keeps a person stuck in it every single time. Yeah, there's different pieces that you can have of like financial abuse or different pieces where they don't have a plan, but like 9 times out of 10, the reason why a person can't leave is simply because of the trauma bond, or even if they left, it's still the reason why he's stuck in their head. Oftentimes, like the biggest piece that we have to work on inside of that is just the rewiring process. When you think about it this way, like a narcissist rewrites history. So like he takes something that's true and he flips it to something that's false. And the rewiring process, the goal is we help people go through the process to be able to take what's false that he's made them believe and switch it back into something that's true. That's why we call it rewiring, because we're trying to rewire the thought process and the patterns of what they're believing, because ultimately they're believing his lies or they're believing their own lies that they've built to be able to justify being in or staying in a toxic relationship. So bringing somebody back to the facts of the situation, about to the truth and the reality of what's happening, that clarity is like one of the first guiding pieces to help inside the journey. And the clarity also helps once we acknowledge and see the trauma bond to start working through the subconscious programming, the stories that they believe, in order to help them actually break that completely.
So, it sounds like that mindset and that reframing is a big deal. So if someone's listening right now and they might not even know they're in that type of relationship because they're so stuck in it and the
Mm-hmm.
trauma bond, what are some things that questions maybe they could ask themselves or signs that they can look for to kind of question themselves to see if they're, like maybe am I in a narcissistic relationship? What could they
Yeah.
ask themselves?
There's a lot of different red flags that they could look into. We've got a lot of content. There's a lot of books out there that talk through like a ton of red flags, right? So those are a big piece of like wondering. But as far as like the piece of like quick down and dirty trying to figure it out, being like, am I confused about the relationship? About like what's actually happening? Am I confused about the status of the relationship? If this person does love me, if doesn't love me, if I am I being accused of stuff that I haven't done? Like, am I apologizing for things that I haven't done? Am I explaining things that I haven't done? Am I trying to get answers to questions and I never get an answer, but it's circular reasoning, or I start asking a question and it gets flipped back on me? A lot of times you'll have narcissists that won't stay on topic because they don't want to be exposed about what's actually there. Like, does their partner not take accountability, not take responsibility for things that he's done? Is he a liar? Oftentimes we'll see lying, cheating, we'll see different pieces of different addictive patterns inside of
Mhm.
narcissists because of the ego and because of what they're trying to avoid, hide, or sedate inside of their own world as well. So there's a lot of different pieces. I'd say like looking a lot of times at people's definition even of love, right? They might have a definition that they think love ends up being this piece that's controlling because that's what they're used to based on their childhood or based on previous relationships. And sometimes just the reality of waking people up to what is currently affecting them and what is currently happening. We'll have this a lot of times when someone has either left and they're worried about contacting the narcissist. They're worried about just like breaking down and being like, I should call him, and they want to call him, right? And so sometimes what we'll have people do is even just sit down and write out like 25 things of how they've been affected or what he's done to them. And then
Mm.
understand that like once we get facts in front of a person, it's a little bit easier to start jarring them back to reality. But if there's no facts inside of what they're viewing inside of their world, oftentimes they're going to just believe his reality or believe fiction that he's trying to place upon the other person.
Is there, if you're in one of those relationships, is it worth trying to work it out with that person, or is that kind of, not possible until, obviously, until they're ready to look at themselves? But um, it sounds like most of the time it's just kind of like maybe you need to leave. I don't know.
So how I would normally phrase it is to the level that that person is willing to be honest to themselves. So like if he's not willing to be honest about what he's done, how he's shown up, like what he just said a few minutes ago, like if he's not willing to be honest, like about what's happening, honest to himself, honest to other people, then I would say leave.
Mm,
Because there's no point. You can't work with someone to develop them into a healthy person if they're not willing to be honest. And the other piece inside of it is like it's not the partner's job to fix him. That's one of
mhm.
the biggest fallacies is you'll find many women that want to fix the relationship versus realizing they have to heal themselves. And if he's going to heal himself, he has to do it on his own. Too many times people will stay in the relationship because the narcissist sold them the story of like, I have to do this with you. You're my support. You're the person that's going to get me through it. In reality, like they're the one person that's never going to get the narcissist through it. And the reason why is because there's already so many years and months of abuse and disrespect that's happened. He's never going to respect the person in the healing process either. And so until he's willing to actually do the work on his own, then I don't think there's really any hope there. So like people look at even my life and where I am now with my wife and with my family. And oftentimes they'll skip the reality that one, I worked on myself and I was in like my own individual therapy for a long time before we did couples counseling. And inside of that too, I was in therapy and my wife also left for a little bit over a quarter of a year because there wasn't a piece where she was going to fully break the trauma bond while she was still getting re-triggered by me.
Mm.
So she had to be able to step away to heal. I had to be able to be left by myself so that no one, I couldn't blame anyone else. Like the buck had to stop with me so I could actually see, okay, is this actually the life that I want or do I want to change it? Because the only thing I can change is myself. Otherwise, I'm going to keep repeating the same thing just over and over again.
Yeah. Do you work with couples ever?
I have. We haven't had a ton of success working with couples where one of them is narcissistic. Typically, when we see it on both sides, we do not see a consistency either way, but typically one of the couples will do the work and the other one won't. And so typically what happens, and I've had it on both sides. I've had the narcissist do the
Wow.
work and the survivor not do any, and the survivor do all the work and the narcissist not do any. But a lot of times we don't see the long-term progress simply because one's not willing to actually do the work.
Yeah. Interesting.
Mhm.
So if someone's kind of first waking up to the fact that they are in a relationship with a narcissist, what's the first step that you would suggest that they take?
I'd say there's a lot of different pieces of directions that they could take depending on where they are. But one aspect would be getting around community that understands it, because one of the first pieces is you feel like crazy, alone. You feel like nobody understands it or gets it. That's why it's essential to, work with someone who understands it, that's actually navigated it before, or that has people inside their community that has. And then the other piece inside of it is understanding there has to be clarity that's brought into a person's world. So like we teach everybody to work through what we call the freedom formula, which is helping people get grounded to the facts. And that's one of the things that a narcissist is relying on, selling you a fiction and a fantasy reality based on future faking, love bombing, the gaslighting, and it's all based on like emotionally driven. So like when we start working on rewiring the thought process, we have to get a person grounded on like what are the actual facts. This is why if a person is getting lied to or gaslit a bunch, like one of the best ways to initially do it is start writing things down. Like what do they actually know that's true? What happened inside that conversation? Because otherwise they'll forget it because they've been told so much that they have a bad memory, that they don't remember things correctly, that they're just making things up, that they're over dramatic. So many different pieces that'll come out of
Mm.
that. So grounding a person in the facts is like one of the biggest things, being around community so people can remind them of who they are, and then getting around other people that can help coach and lead and guide them so they can actually shift the mindset. Because so many times we typically don't see people do it on their own, and we typically don't see people do it alone. It oftentimes needs to be inside of a community. Once a person disconnects or they isolate, it's pretty much just time before they either go back to the abuser or they get involved with another one.
So you talk about facing the truth to be free. What does that truth look like for both the survivor and the abuser?
So inside of this, you probably heard like the truth will set you free, right? That like phrase. We oftentimes will tweak it just a little bit and talk about the facts will set you free.
Mm,
Mainly because I do believe that there's ultimate truth, and I believe that's through God. But I think on this side of Earth, what we have is people that interpret truth and through their own perception and their own perspective, right? Of like I have my truth, you have your truth, the listeners have their version of truth of what they believe. But when we start dealing with the facts, it's a little bit less about someone's truth or perception or perspective. It's just on what are the facts. And so being able to get clear on what a person did or what he said or how he responded or what happened is very essential so that they can actually have freedom. Ultimately, we're looking at establishing that first top level from the narcissist to the survivor of what are the facts, so they can actually start delineating and having a line in between them and the narcissist of clarity of like,
Mm.
oh, this is what's happening. This is what he's doing. This is how it's affecting me. And then it's diving deeper into what are the facts that a person's actually telling themselves. Right. There's a story that everybody's telling themselves, and we have thousands of stories that our lives are run off of. And the more we start realizing there's some that have been implanted there by the narcissist, there's some that we've started to ascribe to ourselves because of the narcissist, and being able to start working through what are the facts? What am I actually telling myself? What's the story I'm telling myself? And like, what do the facts say? Do they actually
Mhm.
support or deny what I'm telling myself? Or sometimes a person is making something up based on their environment, based on their reality, that's actually not based in facts. It's not based in the actual reality of what's happening. So when we ground someone inside the facts, that's where there begins more opportunity for people to be like, oh, like I couldn't have tried one more time to be able to phrase it differently and you wouldn't have got mad, because I tried it for 10 years, almost every day, a different way. Like one more time wouldn't have made the difference. Right. But they have to look at the facts. Otherwise, they'll look at the hope of, well, maybe it'll shift next time.
Right. Yeah. So, how do people unknowingly perpetuate trauma cycles even after they've left a narcissist? How do they, get off that hamster wheel?
I would say that a lot of times they unknowingly perpetuate it because they haven't healed.
Mm.
Typically, they've coped, or they've avoided, or they've discounted, or they've just disassociated and moved on to the next thing or the next person, but they haven't spent the time to actually heal. And what I mean by healing is where they can actually sit and work through the process so that that person no longer causes trauma even coming back up in their mind, right? The idea of getting to a person to a place where they're like indifferent. So like if you ran into your ex and, turned the corner and there he was, it'd be like, okay, like it wouldn't be that big of a deal. And we see a lot of people that they've rewired their mindset where it's not a big deal, simply because they're like, I've progressed so much farther than where I was when I was with you. Like you're
Hmm.
not even attractive. You don't even have a pull on me anymore because I know who I am. And typically when a person continues the cycle, and when you see either a person that feels like they're getting targeted by narcissists, or they feel like they're always attracting narcissists, it typically boils down 9 times out of 10 to like the same thing, which is a lack of boundaries and a lack of identity. So when a person doesn't know who they are and they don't have boundaries that are for themselves, not for other people, then they'll typically have that piece slide off the rails and they'll fall in prey with anybody. And that is toxic, simply
Yeah.
because those boundaries are guardrails keeping you in the direction you want to go. And the identity, the purpose piece is saying that's who I'm going to be. Narcissists are very good at coming alongside and sideswiping you off of that road, that the direction that you want to go. Right. And so typically a person's like, well, I do know who I am. I do have strong boundaries, but they didn't keep them enforced, and they tried to enforce a boundary on another person versus live the boundary, the vision, values that they actually had. And typically when someone is like, well, I know who I am, be like, well, you didn't long enough for him to push you away from what you actually wanted. And that's typically where we find the main crux of the cycle continuing, is a person who doesn't have boundaries or just simply doesn't
Mm.
they are.
Yeah. So for me, and maybe for other people that have been in those kind of relationships, for me, the hardest part in my healing was letting go of the stories he was going to continue to tell people
Mhm.
about me, the lies and spinning the whole whatever happened and stuff. And so for me, letting that part go and learning to not care, like I just had to not care about that. That was a big hurdle. And I know people that are still stuck on that hurdle.
Mhm.
How do you help people get through that part of it?
So part of it is, when you boil down healing into a really small group, a part of it all is the same, as we're trying to be able to heal the triggers that are causing the reaction responses. Right. So it's not necessarily the fact that he's going on and telling other people, it's that when he does that, it triggers something inside of you that causes a reaction or response. It might be triggering the piece of ego, might be triggering the piece of injustice, might be triggering pride, might be triggering guilt and shame, embarrassment, and might be triggering like so many different pieces. So working on that trigger is like one of the first and foremost things. The other piece inside of it is understanding that a fire only burns as long as you give oxygen to it. And many times people will look at the smear campaign as like, well, I need to justify, I need to explain, I need to go tell all these people that that's not what happened. And all they're doing is feeding the fire, because that's what he wants. He wants
Mm-hmm.
a reaction, he wants a response, he wants you to engage in the game. And many times people get stuck in playing the game with the narcissist, thinking that they can figure out the cheat codes to finally win the game, when the reality of winning the game against a narcissist is by not playing the game.
Yeah.
But most of the time people think like, well, I can say it different, I can communicate it better, I can do X, Y, and Z, but they're still playing. And that's the thing many times people will miss out is a narcissist feeds off of what we oftentimes call supply, which would be how a person reacts or responds, which means that that supply is not indicative of it being positive or negative. He still gets off on either one. So
Mm-hmm.
when people think like, oh, well, I'm gonna stick it to him and I'm gonna call him out. Okay, he still knows you're thinking about him. Well, I'm gonna not block him on my phone and I'll just ignore him. Okay, well, he still knows he's getting through. There's all different types of ways where people will like think that they're not giving a narcissist supply, but he's going to switch everything into supply as long as it's a reaction and response inside of it. So when they're going through like a smear campaign, it's really key to understand to not give him supply, not give him a reaction response, not give the fire oxygen, or it'll keep burning. And the people that just believe his story right off the bat and don't come to you or don't come and verify, like, is this true? Like, this doesn't sound right. Those are people that didn't want to believe the truth. And they also weren't your friends to start off with. I think they were just
Yep.
people that were like, okay, I'll just go wherever the conflict seems the less. So I don't have to be honest with myself about what's actually going on. And you'll find people that will even stick with those stories long term simply because they don't want to admit that they were even duped by another person who was toxic and sold them a reality that wasn't true as well.
Yeah. 100%. All of it.
Mhm.
So, how do you personally stay grounded in your own accountability and avoid slipping back into some of those old behaviors?
So biggest piece relies on honesty. Then we've got therapy that happens very often as well. And then I also have different men that I have in my life for accountability practice. And then inside of that, it's also a piece of my own work internally every single day. So like every single day, I'll work through a process called stacking, which is this piece of like the mental rewiring, reframing. It's my connection to myself. It's my connection to God. I'll meditate. I'll pray. I'll do different practices in the morning that are trying to be able to ground me so I can be able to get out all of the anxiety, stress, frustration, worry, guilt, shame, all the pieces out of it and be able to work through it so I can actually show up in a healthy way throughout the day. Being able to take different moments where I get triggered or want to have different reactions and take those and process them through the tool that we call the stack, which is like the mental rewiring process of shifting what I'm believing in the moment, the story I'm telling myself versus what's actually true, the actual reality based on the facts. And being able to have that constantly inside of my world has been a practice that I've not just enjoyed, but is part of who I am now. Like it's a piece that helps me actually show up more honest, more real, more raw, and helps me continue to grow in the same way that I've wanted to. I just, before I didn't have the tools, I didn't know how to be able to work through it.
Yeah. And so now you're helping other people kind of try to get out of these kind of relationships. If
Mhm.
someone contacts you, what would that look like? What are some of the first steps that they could expect?
So typically people arrive at one of my pages, but typically rawmotivations.com. And then there's a breakthrough link. So it's rawmotivations.com/breakthrough. And that offers an opportunity for them to watch a video, or typically it's like a 9-minute video that people will watch, just having an idea of what I specifically try to walk people through, which is a healing journey and a growth mindset, walking through how to be able to process the triggers and the emotions, how to be able to break the trauma bond, how to be able to establish healthy boundaries, and how to be able to develop their purpose and direction again. And inside of that, walking through, having them understand what that looks like, what that is, and then some of the common mistakes and practices that has them still stuck. They've tried to fix him, they've tried to get him to understand, they've invested so much time and energy doing different things versus some of the things that actually can get them free. And then people will book like a free strategy session from there, and we typically sit down and we'll start mapping everything out, talking through like where they are right now, what's currently affecting them, how that's impacting their world, what they want inside of their world. Most people know what they don't want. It's a little bit
Mhm.
harder to figure out what they want. And then once we have both of those, we can talk about how we actually bridge the gap in between to be able to walk people through a step-by-step process so they can heal. So we do that inside of one of the free calls that we have, just to be able to help establish that and give people clarity, regardless if they choose to work with us or not. And then from there, if they choose to work with us, then we have an opportunity for different programs or intensives that I run that bring people into a community, into connection with other women across the globe, and then coaching to be able to help them work through the tools and processes so they can actually live in freedom versus that confusion.
Do you only work with women?
Women survivors of narcissistic abuse, and then I do have a group where I work with men that are narcissists. But those are the two that I work with. What I've seen inside of the what I run is anytime we've tried to bring men through the healing process specifically, they just don't connect or they don't do the work. So we specifically work with women that have been in toxic relationships, and then also men that have shown up as the toxic abusive guy.
Do you ever have men contact you that, and the women's the narcissist? I mean,
I do.
you always hear it's men, men, men all the time,
Right.
but
I do. Sometimes we'll redirect them to other people that I know of that work specifically with men. We've opened up one of our challenges. We've had some guys come through one of our challenges. Most of them don't. We haven't had a lot of luck with people going through it or success with guys going through it. So we'll typically direct them to other people who like specifically work inside of that frame.
hmm.
Mhm.
And when you work with people, is it one-on-one or is there like group stuff
So
going
majority of
on?
what
How
we
does
do
that?
is group because like we mentioned, people don't heal in isolation. And the reason why we do the majority of it in group is simply because most of the one-on-one stuff that we did early on, we found just had this roller coaster effect of people getting clarity one week and then sliding back into it and then getting clarity the next week. But they didn't have the community and the support throughout the week or even the
Mm.
support from a coach to be able to help like hold their hand when they needed it basically. And so with what we developed inside of work inside of the program, like digital training that we have inside of digital tools that people can work on to ground themselves, to rewire, to break the trauma bond, all different pieces to help throughout the week, and then different calls that we'll run to encourage people, to hold people accountable, to be there for them. And what we found is people learn even more inside of a group environment because one person brings something up, we work through that scenario, work through that issue, and it applies to like 5 or 6 other people. So it helps inside of building that community piece that we see people oftentimes lift up each other, hold accountability more, and oftentimes progress even faster.
And is that on Zoom? So like
Mhm.
anybody can,
Yep. Yeah,
okay,
that's on Zoom
perfect.
inside of our programs. We run everything inside of one app. And so we have everything that connects inside of one app where people can message each other. They can connect inside the community. They can jump on the Zoom calls. They can go through all the digital training and all our tools are inside of it. And then we'll use Zoom because we work with people all over the globe.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
So what's one thing you wish more people understood about narcissistic traits, recovery, and the possibility of change?
With the traits and with recovery is probably like the first thing that I would say inside of that is like he has to do the work on himself. And if he's not willing to do that, then you need to leave or you need to focus on an exit strategy. You need to focus on your healing, period. The other piece is like judge a person by their actions, not by their words, because he doesn't
Mhm.
care, but he's selling you reality that's not actually true. And a lot of times people will stick around for such a long period of time because they want to believe, right? That they're not necessarily that they're naive. They just want to believe because that's who
Yeah.
they love and they care about, which is totally fine and that's acceptable and what should happen inside of a relationship. But the problem is he doesn't care, and that's exemplified, that's demonstrated by his actions. So the more people can know that like he doesn't care because of his actions, the more people can get clarity on what's actually happening inside of their world and actually see it. And the more they can realize that the only way that they can change their current environment and their current situation is to heal themselves. They can't heal him. They can't force him to heal. They can't even heal their kids or force the kids to heal. Like a lot of times I'll talk to moms when they're struggling like with their kids going through it. And what I say is like out of your own healing comes your kids' redemption. Because many
Mm.
times people focus so much time and effort of like, well, I can't focus on myself because I have to get my kids into therapy. I have to take them here. I have to do this and be like, that's fine. But what you need to understand is like your kids are going to catch more of your lifestyle than they are going to actually live what you're telling them to do. They pick up on your actions much more. And so a mom that shows up confident in power and has strong boundaries and is not triggered, like she's showing up the way, that's what's going to impact the kids more than the one that's back and forth and telling the kids, hey, we need to focus on your healing, but she's not doing it. So like if they're not living it, then oftentimes it'll kind of shoot that relationship in the foot.
Yeah. I know for me personally, I stayed longer because I felt like I was trying to protect my kids from him.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that if I stepped away, they were going to see who their dad really was.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of scared me because then they were going to have to go through the same process that I did and, kind of seeing him and
Mm-hmm.
experiencing that. And I felt like I was kind of being that barrier for them. Um, but I know, especially for my daughter, she looks at me now and she's like, Mom, you're such a great example of like, overcoming that and really coming into your own. While my son, we still have an estranged relationship because of the divorce part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Where my ex totally, kind of, well, she left, like you were saying earlier.
Right.
Um, it wasn't me. She's the one that left. So, yeah. So even 15 years later, there's still some
Mm-hmm.
estrangement there. But at the same time, I had to step in and do what I needed to do and get out of there. I literally felt like I was dying in that relationship from the inside out. So I had to leave. But that's basically why I stayed as long as I did, was to kind
Mm-hmm.
of, I was trying to, protect them.
And sometimes the harsh reality is oftentimes when parents are trying to protect their kids versus sometimes being honest with them, it sometimes puts them in a situation that the kids end up resenting the parent because they didn't see it, they didn't know it, or they picked up on it and they just saw what the parent was actually conditioning them to put up with. So
Hmm.
it's hard because you'll have a lot of times that moms that not necessarily that a mom should use their kids to, as a sounding board or talking to them, but like being able just to be honest with their answers. It's too many times you'll find many women that are stuck in a toxic relationship, justifying, explaining away, like covering up, even lying for the abuser to the kids. And then as a result, they grow up and the kids be like, well, he wasn't that way. You said he wasn't that way. And then it ends up like biting them back just simply
Hmm.
because didn't have like the truth early on.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So if somebody wants to contact you and work with you, where can we find you?
So easier place is rawmotivations.com. We've got social media everywhere under Raw Motivations as well, but rawmotivations.com has a breakthrough call for women or a breakthrough call for men, either way, that they can be able to take a look at the video, fill out a quick form so I understand just where they're coming from. And then we can schedule a free strategy session just to sit down and map out where they are, where they want to go, and how to be able to bridge the gap in between.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Awesome. We'll have all those links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Ben Taylor, for coming on today and confirming to me that I wasn't in a narcissistic relationship.
Thanks for having me. I
Thanks
appreciate
so
it.
much. That was Ben Taylor, and what a powerful conversation on the realities of narcissistic abuse and recovery from both sides of the story. It's not often that we hear directly from someone who has walked the path of the abuser and had the courage to stop, reflect, and transform their life, and then use that insight to help others break free. If you want to learn more about Ben, book a session, or check out his viral content and workshops, you'll find all his links in the show notes. And if this conversation stirred something in you, you're not alone. And you don't have to navigate this journey alone either. Whether you're breaking free from emotional abuse or just beginning to reconnect with your own truth, somatic mindful guided imagery can be a powerful next step, and I would love to help. You can find out more at my website, somatichealingjourneys.com. If you are helping people with an out of the box modality or therapy and would like to share it with the Karma Crew, email me at mindyourownkarma@gmail.com and let's get you on the podcast. Thanks for listening today, Karma Crew. And remember to take what you need and leave what you don't. And always remember to mind your own karma. I'll see you next time.